We can do the opening chants. Janmadhyasya yaton vayadi taratas charte sabignyasvarat tene brahma hridaya adi kavaye muyanti yat suraya tejo vari mritam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo misha Dhamna svena sada nirasta kuhakam satyam param dhimahi. That from whom creation, sustenance, and dissolution of the universe take place, who is both the instrumental and material cause of it, who is omniscient, is the only one having self-mastery, being the one independent entity, who illumined the mind of Brahma with the Vedic revelation, whose wisdom is the wonder of even the greatest sages, in whom the world of the three gunas subsist, just as the combination of materials like fire, water, and earth subsist in their causes without changing their elemental nature, in whose consciousness there is nothing false. On that truth supreme we meditate. So, today we are speaking about the importance of bhakti. When Swamiji asked me for the topic, I was expecting that he wasn't going to need the topic very quickly because previously he hadn't had to put it onto the sheet. So then a couple of days after that, he asked me, "What is the topic?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, you need to tell me it because I have to put the poster." And so I just gave this topic. It's something which is obviously very important, and we do these classes usually on the Bhagavatam, which is primarily bhakti text. And so I felt this would give me scope to move in different directions. And I realized there's a lot of directions to move because when you have bhakti, right, that's a pretty big topic, pretty general. But then importance kind of signifies that you're looking at it in a context, so like in a broader context. So that's what I tried to do, is to look at it in a broad context. And this journey began with a few different commentaries I was looking at. First, I'll mention that Pushpen, when I mentioned the name of this topic, he said that what importance of bhakti is natural. You don't have to think about the importance of bhakti. Like, as beings, we feel drawn to this infinite being, this infinite love, naturally. But we also see that not everybody has that perspective. So naturally, so sometimes you have to put in the logic and try to convince. And so to look at that importance, certainly has some value. And I'll get to this naturalness as well in the first part. So I started with looking at a few commentaries of the Bhagavad Gita. I want to look at the bhakti portion of the Bhagavad Gita to try to get some ideas from there and to just basically study and put together a talk and a lecture. The first ones that I saw, I was looking for something with enough content to look at just one chapter and have enough content there. So I saw Swami Chinmayananda and Swami Paramarthananda. They both had these pretty extensive commentaries. Swami Paramarthananda had extremely extensive commentaries, something like 3,000 pages. So nice resources, but as I started to look into it, I realized that both of them are giving a different perspective than I had expected. You know, I was looking for this bhakti perspective, but I realized both of them are turning it into some type of jnana yoga. It seemed different. They're both kind of giving a different turn to it, but neither of them are really what I was expecting. So I started to think about this and think about what's going on here. At that time, I couldn't find any commentary that seemed, you know, to kind of align really with like the Ramakrishna mission sort of attitude about it. I think there might be a couple, but like at that length, there was only Swami Ranganathananda, but that's very, very geared towards connecting to, you know, these modern thought currents and all of the intellectual currents, and so it was more of like a sort of advanced commentary. Then I came to this series of articles by Swami Bhajanananda. I'd actually read it sometime in the past, and then this made me think of that. And he gives this very nice explanation, which let me kind of feel that I could understand what was going on here. He says that a big cause of the confusion surrounding, you know, what bhakti is and what these yogas are, is this lack of this concept of marga, and lack of marga and yoga, this distinction. And so basically, if we think about the basics of spiritual life, it's basically us and the Lord. Us, the Atman, and then the Lord, Brahman. Brahman has two aspects, saguna and nirguna. And so you basically orient towards one of those aspects, and he said that this is what the marga is. Then yoga is, we have our own faculties, and so you look at what are the major faculties, and those generalizations form basically the yogas. The yoga is your practice that you can do with yourself, and then where you're orienting yourself towards is the marga. Another simple way to think about this is Swami Vivekananda gives this metaphor, or this analogy, that if you're driving in the wrong direction, and you realize you're driving in the wrong direction, what you do is you just turn around, and then you accelerate in the right direction. And so the marga is basically the turning. What direction are we orienting ourselves? And then the yoga is the acceleration. So these two made it seem very simple. Swami Chinmayananda, he sort of puts the bhakti yoga oriented towards jnana marga, towards nirguna Brahma, which is certainly there in the Bhagavad Gita, but we just feel that it's also towards saguna Brahma, that we also feel that saguna Brahma can give us moksha, can give us the ultimate. Then Swami Paramarthananda, he says, I think what I could understand is that he basically looked at bhakti yoga as the upasana yoga from the Vedic pathway that's outlined there. And then he says to orient it towards, it should be oriented towards Brahman, both in the nirguna and saguna. And so he adds the bhakti marga in there. And so I saw in these two that Swami Chinmayananda seemed to take this idea of bhakti yoga, but say that he interprets Sri Krishna as telling us to orient towards nirguna Brahma, whereas Swami Paramarthananda looks at bhakti yoga as this preparation in sort of the traditional Vedantic pathway, as the preparation for jnana yoga. But you can do all of these in orientation towards either nirguna or saguna Brahma, either jnana marga or bhakti marga. So that was my experience of seeing what is bhakti? Because importance of bhakti, so we need to look at what is bhakti. And that sort of expanded my view of what this topic was, and it helped me to see, various things like these commentaries that I was looking at, to see them in a new light, and kind of understand better where those commentators were coming from, rather than just, disagreeing. It felt like I could see really where they were coming from, and what parts of the text spoke most to them. Then I did find by Swami Vivekananda. He had a pretty long commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and so because I wanted to look just at chapter 8 basically, and so there was enough content there that I could find. He sort of has it seems like a very similar view to the Ramakrishna mission, as far as this bhakti. Seems like he has sort of a Vijnana view. Usually instead of saying like bhakta or jiva, many times he says atman. He looks at the devotee as atman, and that's sort of how you look at bhakti marga. When you have all these 4 yogas of bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and the rest, when you have the jnana yoga in bhakti marga looking towards Ishvara, then you can see yourself as the most core level of the saguna level of Atma, that Karana Sharira. And that's how, when this body dies, then you can continue doing bhakti. Otherwise, if you're not having that discrimination, even in the saguna path, that I'm not the body, then these things like death will totally haunt you, and you won't be able to make progress in the very long term towards this ultimate goal. So, with looking at the importance of bhakti, I looked at the individual and the macrocosmic sides of the equation. So I began with the macrocosmic side. I had been reading that article from Swami Vivekananda, and it got me very interested, and he had a lot of these very powerful ideas and big ideas. And so this might be getting into a little bit of speculative territory, but hopefully we can stay on track a little bit. So how did this idea of bhakti arise, right? It seems like in the old Vedic times that there wasn't really this idea of bhakti. Eventually, you got the idea of karma kanda, then upasana, the upasana kanda, and then the jnana kanda, and then finally, then this idea of bhakti comes in a sort of complete way that the Vedantic teachers are explaining to us and teaching us how to do it as a practice in yoga. And it seems like before recent times, before the Kali Yuga came, that this idea wasn't even there, which is weird, because in the earlier ages, it's said that the humanity was much more spiritual, right? And so basically, this really comes down to the Yogamaya, right? To the Yogamaya of the Lord, that we live in something which is totally not understandable, not comprehensible to us, but yet it is bringing us towards the Lord. It is helping us to spiritually evolve. But let's get into the depth of how this idea of bhakti came at the macrocosmic level, how the philosophy of bhakti came, why it came. And so at the core of it, you have the divine Yogamaya. Very difficult topic to get into, so I don't think I'm going to do, much of a deep look at that, but, to propitiate that and to, respect that as the ultimate cause I think it's important. But so this Yoga Maya is always trying to bring about a revelation of yoga, of the path, and our real identity to us. In that way, we can know what we have to do and what is the scope of our goal. Because if we do not have this saguna aspect in our real nature, like many of the Vedantic acharyas of recent times, they'll say that there is no form in the real nature, there's no name in the real nature of you. But is that true? Sri Ramakrishna says that the truth contains both nirguna and saguna, that both of these make up the Brahman, both of these make up the Atman. And so the point is to give us a complete picture, that Mahamaya wants to give us the complete picture, the truth. She wants to give us this full spirituality. And so through these macrocosmic cycles, which are incomprehensible to us, slowly she is raising us up. She is giving birth to us and slowly raising us up through ages and ages. Like, as we know, the soul takes so many births before it gets to a high level of spirituality. And so these things that we can't really comprehend, the yugas, the lokas, whatnot, which are not really relatable to even a modern scientific understanding, which feels that it has such an immense view that it sees the whole universe, stars, 100 billion light years away, but they can't even relate to these ideas really. So through this revelation, it's trying to reveal to us. If we look at the yugas, we see like a gradual decline. Slowly, there's a decline to the Kali Yuga, and then quickly it shoots up to the Satyuga. How does it do that? Only through the grace of the Lord. So slowly the Lord lets us decline, and we see ourselves sinking, and we by that gradualness, we see that it is our fault, that we're letting it decline, and slipping, and then the Lord appears and resuscitates us. It is sort of like a damsel in distress situation, like you hear in these Disney fairy tales, that the princess is maybe with the procession of the royal procession, and she comes to something she sees off of the side of the trail, and she walks over there, and she starts getting lost. And then there's some house, and she thinks, I shouldn't go there, but I'll go there. And she goes in there, and there's a dragon, and it grabs her and takes her away. And slowly, she's just getting into a worse and worse situation. And then she's far away in some, dungeon or something. And so she's just seen, her level of helplessness over and over again. Slowly, it's increasing. And then at the end, the prince shows up, and once she sees the prince, then he kills the dragon, and then it's all happy from there. And so just like that, these yugas, we slowly decline. We see that it is, as God slowly withdraws, we are just declining. And then at the end, he appears and just lifts everything up. And so the truth that we are dependent on the Lord, that the Atman is dependent on the Lord, gets revealed through this. During the gradual decline, we see that without God, we can't do anything. And that implies that we are having form and we're having name, we're the Saguna Atma. And so to have a perspective of bhakti, to have a perspective that God is Saguna, and we need to relate to Him through our own love and attachment, through this bhakti. We slowly see this importance rising gradually at this macrocosmic level. And so that's sort of like the deeper layer to, how this bhakti becomes more important to us. And at the end, it's so important, and we don't have it, right? But we have the philosophy of it, and we see, the immense importance of it through this slow process. At this point, we still feel, though, that we have so much evolutionary progress in the world. We feel that, we have the highest level of technology, the highest level of culture. Back in the old times, we're all cavemen or something like that. A big part of that is the Western historiography and the Eastern historiography are just totally different. Like, the Western historiography is that, humanity in this earth, in this life, it just sort of, came out of thin air, like it was created. Whereas in the Eastern historiography, we look at everything as cycles. So humanity lives in cycles. We don't just sort of come out of nowhere. It's same as reincarnation, where before this life, I don't remember anything. But yet, that doesn't mean that I wasn't. I still was. I still was at the human level. I still had a human level soul. And so the same thing we apply to the macrocosmic level, where, sure, we don't remember, the past days of humanity. But the most logical thing is that it's cyclical. Like, everything in nature is basically cyclical. The rain is cyclical, the days are cyclical. There's so many of these cyclical phenomenon, but there's no phenomenon which just pop out of nowhere. And so to take a scientific approach to it, where we're going to use generalizations, we have to use the cyclical model, because there's no examples. There's not even one particular example of something just coming out of nothing. And so how can we form a generalization based off of zero particulars? It's not possible. And so this idea of a cyclical life of humanity really is, very scientific. And we don't remember it, but the sages and rishis do remember this sort of thing. And we might not have met them, but the teachings and the immense philosophy that they have output, we see that. And applying that in our life, we see the microcosmic changes that occur. So the evolution in the world is really an illusion. Swami Vivekananda talks about this in Jnana Yoga. And he gives this very poignant, a little bit painful example of the rise of the Western nations. That, basically many of these Western nations, Christian nations, were able to rise by pushing down other nations. We see this especially with India, where during British Raj, India was reduced from 25% of the world economy to 3% of the world economy. Along with that, the atrocious, things you can imagine going along with it. I'm not going to get into the other statistics, but they are very, very brutal, the other statistics. And yet, still today, they've done polls. I think just now, they've gone below majority, thinking that, colonialism was a good thing, a glorious thing. So this feeling of progress in the world is always going to be illusory, because this world is not meant as something which is going to evolve. It's meant as something for us to evolve. This is the basic of the Yoga Maya, right? The Lord sets up this environment for us, and we come into it and we do work, and we at first we try to improve it. Eventually we realize that we're just punching thin air. It's not doing anything, but we're improving internally. We're improving, and so we evolve internally, while the world it goes up and it goes down over time. So what we've seen is from the olden times, there didn't appear to be this bhakti. Okay, I brought up the Western historiography. So the Eastern historiography, which I need to bring in, is yes, that in the olden times, in the Satyug, we had a higher level of spiritual development. And so how, at that time, did they not know about bhakti? The answer is simply that the evolution that we've seen since then has been an evolution of crutches, while simultaneously we've been seeing an involution of the user of the cause into matter. So at the same time as we have these, extensive systems of philosophy and institutionalized religion, we lose our own power and our own ability to connect to God and to see God. Whereas at that time it was really quite obvious. There's one of these smritis I was checking out, and it said that in the Satyuga, that life was in the bones. Then in the next, in Treta, it was in the flesh and the organs, and the next, it was in the skin, and then now it is external in the food. And so just like that, now we need to take in this idea of bhakti from the external. It is not anymore in our bones, in our natural awareness and our natural inclination. But at one time, it was obvious to the Saguna people, to the people with form. The God was obvious, and to connect to that was not just obvious. I mean, it was their deepest desire naturally. So at that time, the institutional religion was not needed. At this time, we all need to be institutionalized. But so at that time, it was intuitive, and then it became axial. This is Sri Aurobindo has this schema that previously we had this intuitive age, and then at the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, previously we had the intuitive age, and then it turned to axial. Then at the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, it has turned back to intuitive, so just the very beginning. But these are very, very long time cycles. So to see the break of that dawn, we're just barely beginning to see that, if that is true. But at that early time, you would intuitively see these things. One example is these upasanas. If you compare the upasanas at the Vedic time to the modern times, you see that in the world around them, they just naturally saw Ishvara, they saw God. And so the upasanas were like the solar upasana, fire upasana, and this sort of thing. And they could easily connect through that to God. Eventually the tantras came, and we saw that much more sophisticated forms of God were given to us, much more sophisticated symbols with very elaborate descriptions and all these qualities and things like that, which we are able to relate to more. But at that early time, just the sun seemed to be like proof of God. Direct proof of God is the existence of the sun. Abhijit was recently telling me about his discussions with some village people when he was younger, and they're talking about God, and some of the village people said that it was a discussion about whether God exists, and they said, "It's like, don't you know about rain? Isn't it proof enough of God?" And so, if you're at that higher level of spiritual development. I mean, I don't know about if those village people were or not, but the people in this earlier age, when we didn't see any of this bhakti, they still had this, intuition. It was just obvious to them that the Lord existed. And to not connect to that would be crazy. To not want to attach the mind and all of the whole being to that would be crazy. It is like now we don't have textbooks. We don't need textbooks on how to put food in the mouth or how to poop. And so at that time, this bhakti was not needed. So that's the macrocosmic side that I was looking at. That was my thinking over the past couple of weeks on it. Certainly incomplete picture, and felt quite speculative for me, but also very, very enlightening in certain ways. So the microcosmic picture, I was mostly looking at chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita, the Akshara Brahma Yoga. And here we see this idea of death, this idea that we are imminently walking towards death. Death is imminently coming, is a fact. When it comes, we don't know, but we should be prepared. And through this, we can see this importance of bhakti. But also, it is hard to try to explain how everything shows the importance of bhakti. So we can just recognize the naturalness of it. And as I explain it, hopefully, it'll be obvious because the naturalness of bhakti. So bhakti, it's meant to bring us to this pra-bhakti. This is what we want to attain, prema. It's a very rare state. Sri Ramakrishna said that seeing someone with this prema, seeing a manifestation of this is like seeing a Shiva linga that has just erupted out of the earth, and you don't know where it came from. How it came, where it came from, we can have no idea, but probably the roots are coming from somewhere, Benares, maybe. So it's a very rare thing, and the attainment of it is something to devote a life to, something to devote many lives to, and this bhakti is the way that we can channel our energies and channel our mind into that pathway. Who is bhakti important to? Well, at a certain stage, the important thing is to get prepared. We have this sadhana chatushtaya, and so with all of the sadhanas, all of the margas which bring us to a direct realization of Brahman, there is some preparation. With bhakti, I think we have sort of a simplified schema. Many of these things are included, whereas in the traditional Vedic pathway of Jnana Yoga, the Upasana Yoga and the Karma Yoga, they were explicated as separate steps you had to take beforehand, whereas now it's sort of all just been packaged into one thing, and they're telling you, man, use your love and attach to God. So before we come to this point of death, we need to prepare with bhakti. We need to become at least having a pretty continuous level of this bhava. Before that, we are hopelessly unprepared, and when that weight comes, we will simply be crushed by it. Swami Vivekananda says in the Bhakti, don't become crushed to mere matter. And so this is one of those times when, you can really get sucked under if you don't have the preparation. But if you do have the preparation, then the pressure, it can make a diamond, as they say. So before that, as an unprepared person, in our old age, before that time comes, we may end up, as Sri Ramakrishna said, that many old men. Well, it was a sort of a joke generalization, that there's an old man in the house with a bunch of women, and so sometimes they get a big pumpkin and they need someone to cut it, and so they say, "Hey, come cut the pumpkin," and he hobbles over sort of morbidly with a big knife, and then he cuts the pumpkin. And so that sort of person who has just become inactive in old age because they don't have any of these samskaras generated, they're not going to profit from death, because death is something we can profit from massively, especially in this path of bhakti. So two of these ways we can look at preparation are through this sort of a Vedic lens, with this pathway, like I was talking about, the karma yoga, upasana yoga. But as I was reading some of these articles by Swami Bhajanananda, he shows how the generalizations still hold true, like the particulars of how karma yoga and upasana yoga are to be done is given a specific way in the Vedas for time long ago. So that part doesn't exactly apply, but still we have these faculties of action, these faculties of mental, of mind. Upasana yoga kind of includes both the name aspect and the form aspect, and also a little bit of this self-subjective, objective aspect of it. And so these two are still there. And bhakti basically includes these. Like if you look at the scheme of Narada with Gauna Bhakti, Mukhya Bhakti, and Prabhakti, in many ways it seems like a reflection of this karma yoga, upasana yoga, and jnana yoga. We see in Prabhakti, Swami Vivekananda is saying that at that stage, you don't have any symbols, you don't have any even suggestions. Suggestions is, a very general, like sort of mental concept, but even that is not necessary. And so it really is not different than jnana yoga. And so as I was seeing that this stage, or that these stages are basically very similar, the Gauna and the Mukhya, and I was reading in the Bhagavad Gita, you see, many things that correspond to these. So for Karma Yoga, in chapter 8, verse 7, Sri Krishna, he says, Sarveshu Kaleshu Anusmara Yudhyacha, right? So he is imploring us to always remember God and to fight. And so Arjuna, of course, is fighting, but we also have to fight, especially if we are applying ourselves to this bhakti, then, we have to fight to get to that level where we can cruise. But in the beginning, it's always going to be a fight. And so to always remember God and to do our duties is the core of karma yoga. And when we look at it as a support to bhakti yoga, if we're going to take bhakti yoga as sort of our main thing, then it is an important support and an important thing to get established before we dive into the depths of bhakti yoga. So in that way, you can sort of look at it as a preparation, because if we want to dive into the depths of Bhakti Yoga, then the Karma Yoga is a preparatory step. Swami Vivekananda differs from many of these Vedantic acharyas in that he says that through Karma Yoga too, you can attain the highest through that alone. But as a bhakti or as a bhakta, it is forming a necessary baseline that you need to have all of these yogas connected in one personality, one integrated personality. And so once we've established that to a decent degree, then you can take this Mukhya Bhakti stage, and here we have this Upasana Yoga. So here Swami Vivekananda gave these three aspects based on the general trends of spirituality. So we have name, we have form, and then we have an I thought. So we also generally in most traditions, I believe, we have japa, we have the visualization of the deity, the dhyana, and then we have some attempt to connect to the deity, to feel that I am a part of the Lord, or to feel that the Lord is the inner controller of me. And so these three appeal to our basic aspects of the mind, and having this mental practice is a key basic step to being prepared for whatever is to come, the higher stages of bhakti, and also for death. So the first, the Namopasana, this is the japa that we usually think of, and sometimes the japa will merge into the dhyana, and sometimes the ishta dhyana will merge into the japa. But eventually, these things become sort of one thing. Sort of like, it was seeming to me like the Saguna and Nirguna Brahma get merged into one thing. When you realize Brahman, then you don't have these distinctions that we use to orient ourselves towards Brahman. And so as these things become more second nature, you gain more of this chitta ekagrata, so the one-pointedness of mind. And so as they become integrated into one thing, your mind also becomes integrated into one thought, into one current. If we look at the pratikas, I had mentioned in the bit about the macrocosmic aspect of how this bhakti came about, that in the Vedic period, they had these upasanas in a very natural way with the sun and with fire and this sort of thing. And so Swami Vivekananda was mentioning that it would be a wonderful thing if we revive these upasanas, because they are so powerful. If you think about the sun, it has so many aspects that we can relate to God. It's near infinite. It sustains the whole earth. It is sort of, in that way, it is like an ultimate cause of all life on earth through all time. It is this bright, effulgent light, and it is very much incomprehensible. If you think about olden times, they had no idea how far away it was. They had no idea how big it was, any of this stuff. And so that aspect of nirguna, of something completely beyond your mental comprehension, was also there. And so these are just, seem to be beautiful symbols, which Swami Vivekananda is saying might be worth reviving. And then the tantric is there as well, we had looked at before. And then the third upasana is related to the self. So This is not a fully subjective practice like Atma Vichara is in its proper form like a fully subjective process of just diving into what you are, whatever you are, and piercing the ego. But here, this is sort of a subjective, objective, it's a meditation. And so there has to be this mental aspect involved, this objective mental aspect involved. And so you take something which is sort of like the self. There's a few examples given, like Om is one example. Another is light. Just you like visualize light and think I am the light. And so these very much help with this one-pointedness of mind, of this union of the Atman and the Ishvara in a sort of a gradual expansive fashion. And so these lead to the one-pointedness of mind that we need at that last final moment. And the purity of mind comes from the karma yoga aspect. The karma yoga aspect is critical because with this chitta shuddhi, we can see what is God and what is not God. And so Krishna gives here these two paths. Either we have this desire for a permanent life, or for you can have a relatively long life if you progress into these higher worlds and this sort of thing, but still at the end of the day they get destroyed, and they stay destroyed for a long time. Like we're born and we have a short life and then some period of death, but that period of death is much longer. And so as you get more money, more of these external things, you get more problems, more downsides as well. One example of someone who has this basic preparation is given by Sri Ramakrishna, just to have this continuous practice of thinking of God and relating to God. So Narada is a wonderful devotee, but he's not the example here. One time he got this seed of arrogance in him, and he had this thought that I am the greatest devotee. And the Lord saw this, and so he came to Narada and he said, hello Narada, so there's actually this wonderful devotee. I'd like you to go see him. And so please go to this and this place. And so he sent Narada, and Narada went and he saw this devotee. He would wake up in the morning, and just one time he would take the name of God. Then he would go to his work, and he would be there working hard on the farm the whole day. He would come home and be with his family and doing the household sort of duties. And then he would go to bed, and before bed he would take the name of God just one time. At that time he wasn't thinking about anything else. His mind was pure, and he had one-pointedness of mind. But compared to Narada's life, where he's doing, all of these godly upasanas in heaven or whatever he's doing, he didn't see, the value in it. He didn't see any spirituality in it, and he was getting very confused. So he came to the Lord and put his mind to him, said, I'm not understanding what you're talking about. This person doesn't seem to be thinking about you. He doesn't seem to be practicing any spiritual practices or anything like that. And the Lord said, okay, Narada, that's a perspective. So I have this cup of oil, and here, please take this and just walk around the city, but you don't spill any drops from that. And so he goes and he doesn't spill anything. When he comes back and he says that, Lord, so I didn't spill anything. And so he gives it to him. And the Lord asks, well, how many times during this did you think of me? And Narada says, well, I didn't think of you at all. I mean, how could I have? This cup was just brimming full of oil. So the Lord says that this devotee, he thought of me every day continuously for almost his whole life. Every day he would think of me continuously. And yet you didn't think of me at all this time that you went to do this. And so is he twice the devotee that Narada was? Maybe, maybe not, but he was certainly having, this abhyasa yoga. Sri Krishna mentions that in this chapter as well, this continuous practice, and that prepares us for really whatever is to come. When death approaches, then we need to have this continuous current of devotion, of connection to the general, connection to the infinite at this level that we can connect to at the level of name and form. And so when that death yoga becomes necessary, when we approach that moment, Sri Krishna also gives us the techniques for how to do that. So I don't have time to go into that, so I'm just gonna look at this story of Swami Vivekananda, which shows the importance of bhakti yoga. So one day when Swami Vivekananda was in his youth, he was Narendra, and he was having a very difficult time. He had almost just left his family. There was, seemed like no hope for him to get a job and to be able to do anything to help them, and they were in these dire straits. And so he had almost left, and Sri Ramakrishna wept and asked him to stay as long as I'm alive. And so then Narendra, he gets some temporary job, but he's still having a very difficult time. So he thinks, well, the Divine Mother, grants all of the Master's prayers, so I'll just ask him to grant me this small prayer. And so he goes to Sri Ramakrishna and asks him, can you please pray to me, or pray for me, and get just this little bit of help for me? And Sri Ramakrishna says, but I do pray for you, but Mother doesn't help you because you don't accept her. And Swami importunes him again, or Narendra at that time. And so they go back and forth, and Narendra eventually has to give in, and he says, okay, yes, I will go to pray to Kali. So it is a Tuesday, and Sri Ramakrishna says that this is a very good day to go to the Kali temple. And so later that day, Narendra goes, and as he's approaching, he's getting more and more intoxicated with this thought of seeing the Divine Mother in her beautiful divine form. He approaches the temple, he walks in, and at this point, he has already completely forgotten this prayer. So he just spends hours there meditating and really, well, in sort of this high state of bhava, this connection with the Mother and seeing her form, and he just prays for knowledge and for devotion. And so he comes back, and Sri Ramakrishna asks him, did you pray for what you were coming to pray for? And Swami Narendra, he says, oh no, I forgot. I don't know how I forgot. And so Sri Ramakrishna tells him, go back and pray. And so he goes back, and as he's approaching, the same thing happens. He's just thinking of the Mother. He had just been there and seen her in this divine form. So I mean, the second time, like, what can you really expect? And so he enters the temple, and again he forgets. He just communes with her. sees this divine form of the mother. And again, he comes back, and Sri Ramakrishna asks him if he prayed his prayer. And he's taken aback. He forgot again. Sri Ramakrishna, he sort of probably seems like he knows what's going on, so he just says, "Go back again." And so he comes back to the temple, but as he's walking up, he realizes the silliness of this. He thinks that it's like being royally received by a king, and then you ask for gourds and pumpkins. And so he just goes to the temple and does the same thing that he did the first two times, and he prays to the mother for knowledge and for devotion and this sort of thing. And so when it's over, he comes back to Sri Ramakrishna and tells him, and Sri Ramakrishna tells him, yes, this is the right thing. This is the infinite mother with infinite power, and so, how can you ask for these tiny things? But Narendra still wants to overcome this, so he asks Sri Ramakrishna. But the point is that this is the point where he accepted the Divine Mother. Before this, he had this idea of the Father in heaven, of the what you call the Saguna Nirakar, sort of the Ishvara, which is detached completely from the material universe and from the mental universes. And so this is such a critical point in his life, where he sees this whole new avenue towards divine reality. He sees this whole new orientation opens up by which he can connect to the divine reality. To go from just having this Saguna Nirakar to having the full vision of the Divine Mother, you're going from 1/3 to like 2/3. You can't quantify it, but to throw up a number, it's something like that. And so this gives him an immense power to be in this world and to really be not just as like a witness or like a controller, right? But to really be embodied and yet also be divine, because we are really here in the care, in the lap of the Divine Mother. And so at this point, he now saw that. So later on in his life, there were many times when he was faced with what seemed to be terror manifest in this physical world, in very intense ways. So, like I had mentioned earlier, this illusion of evolution and what happened to India with the British colonialism. And so Narendra writes at one point that he came to Britain with disgust, and even, he says, a hate that probably no one had ever walked onto that land with, because he identified with India. He felt for the whole nation. And so all of that suffering was sort of concentrated into Narendra as he stepped onto the soil of England. But yet we find that later he says that I completely transformed in my perspective on them, and I came to love them and have this deep appreciation of the immense hidden spirituality that lies within them. And so to be able to digest this sort of thing, you have to be able to see the Divine Mother, to see that even in the terrible, there is the divine. Even in the wicked, there is the divine. And so his initial perspective on the English was he felt like this, and there was a lot of logic behind that, but he was able to break through that and to see the inner divine reality through this realization of the mother, through this realization of the core of devotion, right? Similarly, when there was plague in Bengal, he was in terrible health, but he came back to the city, and he was telling the mutt that we need to fully engage in this. And they had just gone the Blur Mutt, very difficult to obtain that and to get the funds for that. And so one young monk asked him, where are we going to get money to do this sort of relief work? We don't have any money. And Swami just said that we'll just sell the Blur Mutt. So having this orientation towards divine reality as manifest everywhere, as immanent, allowed him to connect to people in a way which, really would transform their lives. Fortunately, they didn't have to sell the Blur Mutt, but it opened up that new avenue in his life. And so that was a look at the importance of bhakti in his life. And so I'm going to conclude it there. Is there a picture in the... Nigamakal galitam phalam Shukamukad amritad dravasam yutam Pipata bhagavatam rasamalayam Muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees, quaff to intoxication this nectar of the fruit of the tree of Vedas, flowing from the mouth of the great sage Shuka, and mixed with the ambrosia from his words. Are there any questions? Eze, are there any? Okay. Okay, thank you all. And thank you to Swami Vivekananda for giving me the assignment. And